My wife left when I was caring for my dying father, but crawled back when she thought I inherited millions. The clock on my desk read 11:42 p.m. Another late night at the office. Another promise to Emily broken. I rubbed my tired eyes, my reflection in the monitor showing a man I barely recognized anymore. At 36, the lines around my eyes weren't just from squinting at code all day. My phone buzzed. Dad again. The third time tonight. David, where the hell are you? I need my medication and I can't find it. I took a deep breath. Dad, it's in the cabinet above the sink, left side, blue pill bottle. I labeled it evening with a red sticker, remember? Well, it's not there now, he snapped. If you weren't too busy playing with computers to come check on your own father. The familiar weight settled on my chest. 4 years since his diagnosis, and every conversation still felt like walking through a minefield. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I promised, already shutting down my computer. Make it 15. He hung up without saying goodbye. In my car, I sat motionless, forehead against the steering wheel. Emily's text from earlier flashed in my mind. The kids asked where you were again at bedtime. I'm running out of excuses, David. My life had become a perpetual triage, deciding which relationship would bleed out while I attended to another. Dad was deteriorating, his kidneys failing him just as his pride refused to. Emily was reaching her breaking point, watching me pour everything into a man who'd never approved of my choices. What Emily didn't know, couldn't know, was why I kept running back. Why I endured Dad's criticism, his constant reminders that I abandoned the family business for computer nonsense. The guilt that lived in my marrow wasn't just about being a disappointing son. There was a secret between us, something that happened the summer I turned 18. Something that bound me to him with chains stronger than love or duty. I started the car, bone-tired. In the rearview mirror, I caught my own eyes, Dad's eyes. Sometimes I wondered if I was turning into him, growing more bitter with each passing day, increasingly unable to express what I really needed. The highway stretched empty before me as I drove toward Dad's house, away from my own. Emily deserved better. My kids deserved better, but how could I choose them when every time I looked at my father, I saw the price he'd paid for my freedom? Some debts can never be repaid. Some burdens never set down. As I pulled into his driveway, I steeled myself for the battle ahead. Not just tonight's argument about pills or doctor's appointments, but the war I fought every day, between the man I wanted to be and the son I felt obligated to remain. I found Dad awake when I arrived, sitting in his recliner, oxygen tube snaking from his nostrils. His medication was exactly where I said it would be, but I didn't mention that. The doctor said your levels are worse, I said, handing him a glass of water with his pills. He swallowed them without looking at me. Doctors, what do they know? Enough to keep you alive these past 4 years. The room fell silent, except for the low hum of the oxygen machine. I should have gone home, but something kept me there. Some need to bridge this chasm between us. Dad, we need to talk about your options. The dialysis isn't enough anymore. His eyes snapped to mine, fierce and unforgiving. I'm not becoming some invalid hooked to machines. You're already hooked to machines, I countered, immediately regretting my tone. He leaned forward, voice dropping dangerously. You know what your problem is, David? You never had the spine to make hard choices, always looking for the easy way out. Easy? My voice cracked. You think any of this has been easy? Running away from the business your grandfather built? Hiding behind a computer instead of facing real work? Yeah, I'd call that taking the easy road. 20 years of suppressed anger boiled over. I didn't run away. I chose a different path, one where I wasn't suffocating under your expectations every damn day. Expectations? He laughed bitterly. I expected loyalty, David. I expected a son who wouldn't abandon everything we built when things got tough. I never wanted the business. I tried to tell you 1,000 times, but you never listened. His face contorted with rage. Then what are you doing here? If you can't respect the one thing I asked of you, then don't bother coming back. I'd rather die alone than watch you pity me. I stood there, shaking, as if he'd physically struck me. Is that what you think this is? Pity? What else would you call it? Certainly not respect. I grabbed my keys and left without another word, slamming the door behind me. When I got home at 1:30 a.m., Emily was sitting at the kitchen island still dressed. Her face was puffy from crying. Hey, I said, guilt immediately crushing me. Don't hey me. Her voice was flat. Where were you? Dad couldn't find his medication. Of course. She nodded slowly. And yesterday, it was his doctor's appointment. And tomorrow it'll be something else. I sank into the chair across from her. Please, he's sick. He's manipulating you, David. He always has. She pushed a folder toward me. Our bank statement. Look at it. I flipped it open, confused. Then I saw the withdrawals. Thousands of dollars to my father's accounts over the past 6 months. I was helping with his medical bills, I said defensively. Without telling me? That's our children's college fund, David. Our retirement. What was I supposed to do? Let him lose his house? Emily's eyes hardened. You need to make a choice. I can't do this anymore. Living with your guilt, watching you destroy yourself for a man who's never shown you an ounce of appreciation. He's my father, and I'm your wife. She slammed her hand on the counter. And those kids upstairs? They're your children, but we're starting to feel like we're just convenient pit stops in your real life. The one where you're still trying to win Daddy's approval. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is you keeping secrets from me. What's not fair is you missing Lily's recital last week because your father had an emergency that turned out to be him wanting his TV fixed. The truth of her words stung, but she didn't understand the weight on my shoulders, the debt I could never fully explain to her. I need you to choose, David. Him or us. I looked at her, this woman I'd loved for 12 years now asking the impossible. I can't just abandon him. Then I can't stay. She stood up. I've already talked to my sister. The kids and I are going there next week if something doesn't change. She walked upstairs, leaving me alone with an ultimatum I couldn't possibly satisfy. What Emily didn't know, what I could never tell her, was that my devotion to my father wasn't about winning his approval. It was about atonement for something far worse. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat on our back porch until dawn, watching the sky lighten from black to purple to pale blue. By 7 a.m., I was at the hospital for Dad's dialysis appointment. You look like hell, he commented as I wheeled him into the treatment room. Rough night? Emily giving you trouble? His tone was almost smug. I bit back a retort. Let's just get you set up. 3 hours later, as we sat in traffic on the way home, Dad broke the silence. You should have listened to me from the beginning. About what? I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. About women. They're all the same. Make demands, never satisfied. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Don't talk about Emily like that. She's threatening to leave, isn't she? When I didn't answer, he continued. Just like your mother. When things get tough, they run. Mom didn't run, I snapped. You drove her away. The words hung between us like a live wire. Dad turned to look out the window, and we didn't speak again until I helped him into his house. That night, I tried to make it home for dinner. I'd texted Emily, promised I'd be there. But Dad's blood pressure dropped suddenly after dialysis, and I spent 2 hours in the ER with him. By the time I made it home, the kitchen was dark, dinner dishes cleaned and put away. Emily was in our bedroom, folding laundry with short, angry movements. I'm sorry, I said from the doorway. Dad had a complication. Of course he did. She didn't look at me. He always does when you make promises to us. That's not fair. His blood pressure... Stop. She held up her hand. I can't do this anymore, David. I feel like a single parent. The kids barely see you. When was the last time you attended Lily's soccer practice or helped Jason with his science project? Guilt flooded me. I'm trying my best. Your best isn't enough. She threw a shirt into the basket. Not when every ounce of energy you have goes to your father. The man treats you like garbage, yet you keep crawling back. He's dying, Emily. We're all dying, but some of us are still trying to live while we're here. Her eyes filled with tears. And I want to live, David. Not just survive day to day, wondering if my husband will remember we exist. I reached for her, but she stepped back. I've taken a job in Denver, she said quietly. The words knocked the wind out of me. What? My sister connected me with her firm. They need a marketing director. I start in 3 weeks. And us, the kids? I'm taking them with me. You can visit whenever you want, but I need stability. They need stability. I felt like the room was spinning. You're just leaving? Without even discussing it? I've been trying to discuss it for months. Years. You're not listening. You're so caught up in your father's drama, you can't even see what's happening to your own family. My phone rang. Dad's ringtone. Emily's eyes hardened. Don't you dare answer that. I stared at the phone, paralyzed. If you answer it, we're done, she whispered. The phone kept ringing. 1 ring, 2, 3. I answered. Emily didn't say another word. She walked out of the room, and I heard the guest bedroom door close and lock. Dad's voice came through the line, weak and frightened. David, I think something's wrong. I can't catch my breath. By the time I got to his house, the ambulance was already there. The paramedics were performing CPR. I watched, numb, as they loaded him into the ambulance. Is he going to make it? I asked one of them. The paramedic's face said everything. We're doing everything we can. At the hospital, a doctor I'd never seen before pulled me aside. Your father's kidneys have completely failed. Even if he survives this episode without a transplant, he has days, maybe weeks. I'll donate, I said automatically. We're the same blood type. The doctor hesitated. There are compatibility tests, and given your father's condition, just do the tests. As I sat in the waiting room, my phone buzzed with a text from Emily. I've booked a hotel for tonight. We'll talk tomorrow about next steps. And then, minutes later, a second text. This one from a number I hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. Heard about your dad. We need to talk. Some things you should know before it's too late. Mark Phillips, my father's former business partner. The man who'd disappeared after the accident. Something cold settled in my stomach as I stared at his message. What could he possibly know that would matter now? I never called Mark back. Whatever secrets he claimed to have could stay buried. My father needed me. The compatibility tests came back positive. I could donate a kidney. When I told Dad, his eyes widened with something like fear. No, he said firmly. Absolutely not. It's not up for debate. You'll die without it. He turned away. I won't take your kidney. Find another donor. There isn't time, I insisted. Why are you fighting this? He wouldn't answer, just kept shaking his head. I felt like screaming. Meanwhile, Emily moved forward with the divorce. Paperwork arrived at Dad's house where I'd temporarily moved in. I'd drive 2 hours each weekend to see the kids, then return Sunday nights to the suffocating atmosphere of my childhood home. One evening, as I helped Dad to bed, he gripped my wrist with surprising strength. You should go back to them, he said, his voice clearer than it had been in days. I stared at him. What? Your family. This isn't the life you should be living. I sat on the edge of his bed. Since when do you care about what I want? His face contorted with something like regret. I've never been good at showing it, but I do care. Then let me help you. Take my kidney. No? He looked away. Some debts can't be paid that way. A cold sensation spread through my chest. What debts? Dad, what are you talking about? But he'd closed his eyes, pretending to sleep. I recognized the tactic from childhood. Conversation over. The next morning, I found him unconscious. The hospital admitted him to intensive care, and the doctors gave me the speech I'd been dreading. Prepare for the worst. As I sat by his bed that night, I finally opened Mark's text and replied, What do I need to know? His response came immediately, as if he'd been waiting. Your father's been lying to you your entire life. Meet me at Riverside Diner tomorrow, 10 a.m. I don't know what compelled me to go. Maybe desperation, maybe the need for answers that had eluded me for years. But at 10 a.m. sharp, I walked into the diner and saw Mark. Older, grayer, but unmistakable. David, he nodded as I sat down. Been a long time. What's this about? I asked, cutting through pleasantries. He pushed a folder across the table. Your father didn't fire me. I quit after I found these. Inside were financial records from the family business, dating back 20 years. I scanned them, not comprehending. What am I looking at? Embezzlement, insurance fraud. After your mother left, your father's gambling debts piled up. He started skimming from the company, then taking out fraudulent policies. I shook my head. That doesn't make sense. Dad built that business from nothing. Your grandfather built it. Your father nearly destroyed it. Mark leaned forward. The accident wasn't an accident, David. The blood drained from my face. What are you saying? The warehouse fire that killed those two workers, it was for the insurance money. Your father needed it to cover his tracks. My stomach lurched. No, that's not possible. I confronted him. He threatened me, my family, so I disappeared. Mark's eyes were hard. I always wondered why you stayed with him, after everything. Then I realized, you don't know. I felt like I might be sick. He told me it was an electrical fault, an accident. It wasn't. Mark pushed another document forward, a signed confession. I found this in his desk. He never filed it. I read it, my father's handwriting unmistakable, admitting to cutting corners on safety, knowing the risks. Why are you showing me this now? I whispered. Because I heard you're about to give him your kidney. Mark shook his head. Don't sacrifice any more for a man who's been lying to you your whole life. That night, I sat by Dad's hospital bed, the confession in my pocket. His breathing was shallow, machines beeping steadily. I met with Mark today, I said quietly. Dad's eyes fluttered open, panic flashing across his face. He told me everything, about the fire, the fraud. A tear slid down his withered cheek. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. 2 people died, Dad. And I've paid for it every day since, his voice broke. I couldn't tell you, couldn't bear to see you look at me the way you're looking at me now. Is that why you wouldn't take my kidney? Some twisted sense of penance? He nodded weakly. No right to take anything more from you. I stood up, the weight of 20 years pressing down on me. All this time I thought I owed you something, that I'd failed you somehow. You didn't, he whispered. I failed you. The following morning I signed the divorce papers. Then I called Emily. I need to see you, I said. There are things I need to tell you, about my father, about everything. That evening, as I packed my belongings from Dad's house, I found an envelope with my name on it in his desk. Inside was his will and a handwritten note. David, when I'm gone, you'll find I've left everything to you, with one condition, that you rebuild what I destroyed. Not the business, but your life. The trust contains enough to start over, wherever and however you choose. The only requirement is that you leave the past where it belongs, buried with me. You're the only one who can change this family's fate. Don't carry my burden any longer. Dad died 3 weeks later. I wasn't there. I'd stepped out to grab coffee from the hospital cafeteria. When I returned, a nurse was disconnecting the machines, her face a practiced mask of sympathy. I'm sorry, she said. It was peaceful. I stood in the doorway, coffee growing cold in my hand, staring at the empty shell that had once been my father. The man who had shaped my entire life through equal measures of expectation and disappointment was gone. The relief I felt made me hate myself. The funeral was small, just me, a few of Dad's remaining friends, and surprisingly, Mark. Emily sent flowers but didn't attend. She'd taken the kids to her parents for the weekend, sparing them the awkwardness of a grandfather's funeral amidst divorce proceedings. As people filed out of the chapel, Mark approached me. How are you holding up? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. I feel nothing and everything. He nodded, understanding. Your father wasn't an evil man, David. Just weak in ways that caused damage. I hope you know that. I wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. After the service, I returned to Dad's house, my house now, I supposed, and began the grim task of sorting through his belongings. In his study, I found a safe behind a painting, just like in some bad movie. The combination was my birthday. Inside was the official will, some cash, and a sealed envelope with my name on it, different from the note I'd found earlier. My hands trembled as I opened it. My son, it began. If you're reading this, I've finally paid for my sins, but not in full. That burden falls to you, Bahayu, though I never wanted it to. The company insurance policy settlement from the fire, $2.4 million, is in an offshore account. The details are enclosed. This money was obtained through the worst act of my life. 2 families lost fathers because of me. My final wish is that you find Thomas Reed and Michael Carson's families. The insurance money belongs to them, not to us, not to you. I couldn't face them in life, but perhaps you can make this one thing right in my death. Only then will our family's debt be paid. This is your choice, David. No one would know if you kept the money, but you would know, and it would poison everything you touch, as it did me. I sat in Dad's chair, stunned. This was the task he'd hinted at in his will, the choice he'd left me. For weeks after, I went through the motions of life. I put Dad's house on the market. I drove to see my kids on weekends. I took a leave of absence from work. The envelope with the offshore account details sat locked in my glove compartment, a time bomb I couldn't bring myself to defuse. Then, one rainy Tuesday, Emily showed up at my apartment door unannounced. "Can I come in?" she asked, water dripping from her coat. I stepped aside wordlessly. She hadn't been inside since I'd moved in after our separation. "How are you?" she asked, taking in the sparse furnishings, the takeout containers. "I'm fine," I lied. "What do you want, Emily?" She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about everything, about us. I was wrong to give you that ultimatum." I laughed, a hollow sound. "It's a bit late for that." "Is it?" She stepped closer. "The kids miss you. I miss you. Your father's gone now, and I thought maybe we could try again." I studied her face, searching for an ulterior motive. "Why now?" "Because I've realized some things too. How unfair I was. How I didn't understand what you were going through." She hesitated. "And I know about the will." My blood went cold. "What about it?" "Your father's lawyer called me. He thought I might know if you'd made a decision about the special condition." So she knew, or thought she did. "There's a lot of money at stake, isn't there?" I asked carefully. She frowned. "This isn't about money, David. I know what your father asked you to do. To deliver some package or letter to someone. The lawyer wasn't specific." Relief washed over me. She didn't know the full truth. "It's complicated," I said. "Everything with your father was." She reached for my hand. "But you don't have to figure it out alone. Let me help you." I pulled away. "Why would you want to? Our divorce is almost final." "Because I still love you," she said simply. "Because maybe I gave up too easily. Your father was dying, and instead of supporting you, I made you choose." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to. But something felt off. "I need time," I said finally. She nodded, disappointed but understanding. "Just don't take too long. The kids need stability." After she left, I retrieved the envelope from my car. Inside were not only the offshore account details, but information about the victims' families. Thomas Reed had left behind a wife and 3 children. Michael Carson, a wife and twin boys. I stared at their names for a long time. These weren't abstractions. They were real people whose lives had been shattered by my father's actions. People who had never received justice or even the truth. The choice before me was clear. I could do nothing, inherit everything, maybe even rebuild my marriage. Or I could make things right and lose it all in the process. That night, I made 2 phone calls. One to a private investigator to locate the Reed and Carson families, and one to my divorce lawyer. "I'd like to pause the proceedings," I told him. "I need a little more time." The private investigator found the Carson and Reed families within 2 weeks. The Carsons had moved to Oregon after the fire. The Reeds were still in town, just across the river. I spent days drafting and redrafting letters to them, trying to find words for the unforgivable. In the end, I met with them separately. I told them everything, my father's confession, the insurance money, his final wish. I expected rage, maybe even violence. What I received instead was something far more devastating, quiet dignity in the face of long-suffered pain. Sarah Reed, now in her 60s, listened with hands folded tightly in her lap. "I always knew it wasn't an accident," she said finally. "Thomas was too careful." Michael Carson's widow refused the money at first. "We don't want blood money," she said, her grown sons nodding beside her. "It's not about absolution," I told them. "It's about justice, however late." Eventually, both families accepted the funds, though I sensed it brought them little peace. How could it? No amount could replace what they'd lost. The day after I transferred the last of the money, Emily showed up at my door again. "I spoke with the lawyer," she said, her voice tight. "You gave it all away." I nodded. "It wasn't mine to keep." "But what about our children? Their future?" They'll have a father who did the right thing. That's worth more. Her expression hardened. This is why we couldn't work. You live in some fantasy world of noble gestures while the rest of us deal with reality. No, Emily, I said quietly. For the first time, I'm actually facing reality. She left, and I knew it was truly over between us. The divorce papers were finalized the following month. I sold Dad's house and most of his possessions. I kept only his watch, his father's before him, and a photo of the three of us from before Mom left. Looking at it now, I could see what I'd missed before. The strain in Mom's smile, the possessive way Dad gripped my shoulder, the seeds of everything that would follow. With what little remained after settling Dad's debts, I bought a small consulting firm specializing in cybersecurity, merging my tech skills with the business acumen Dad had tried so hard to instill in me. I negotiated a co-parenting schedule that gave me my children every other week. On those weeks, my apartment transforms. Lily's soccer gear clutters the entryway. Jason's science projects overtake the dining table. We cook together, something I never did with my own father. I listen to their stories, their dreams, their complaints, truly listen without checking my watch or phone. There are still nights I wake up drenched in sweat, hearing Dad's voice, feeling the weight of choices made and unmade. But those nights grow fewer. Sometimes I dream of the fire, though I wasn't there, imagining the terror of those trapped men, wondering if my father heard their screams in his dreams too. Last week, as I helped Jason with his history project, he asked me about my dad. What was Grandpa like? Really like? I considered the question carefully. Complicated, I said finally. He made terrible mistakes, but in the end, he tried to make them right. He taught me that it's never too late to choose a different path. Do you miss him? Lily asked, looking up from her homework. Every day, I answered honestly. But I'm also free in a way I never was when he was alive. There are still questions, of course. Mom's whereabouts, the details of the accident that were never fully explained, the missing years of Dad's life I knew nothing about. But for now, I'm content with the understanding I've gained. The burden I carried wasn't just Dad's expectations or guilt, it was the weight of truths untold and choices deferred. I'm still my father's son, but I'm finally my own man too.